I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar today, hosted by the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee. And our theme of the webinar is celebrating gender diversity, in particular on this Transgender Day of Visibility. My name is Reverend Darrell Jones. I am co-chair of the committee, and we are so excited to have our committee members and special guests to join in today. Myself, along with these other members here, Reverend Christine Monks, Sheila Smith, Brenda Lambert, Reverend Rebecca Hiroka as our liaison. We represent the current committee. If anyone is interested in getting more engaged, you can message us here in the chat, or you can send an email to inclusion@csl.org if you'd like more information on joining the committee. There's multiple ways other than email to connect to us. We have a Facebook page. We have a YouTube page where we post all of our webinars after the fact. So if there's anyone that you knew that was wanting to attend tonight and they just couldn't because of work or whatever, we will be reposting this. We need a few days to get it edited and put up, but it is on our YouTube page. Just a handful of agreements. Remember, we are here to be in love and to have loving communication. This is something to always remember, but especially when we go into our breakout rooms, we will be having some dialogue and discussion tonight. Be present and be available. Let self-compassion, let self-care, along with care for your fellow family here, be the tone of our time together. Everyone is muted, and we ask you to stay muted just for background noise. If you do have a question, if you'd like to make a comment, please just throw it into the chat. We will be monitoring that as well. You can turn on closed captions if that makes it a little bit easier for you to follow along. You can toggle that on or off in the menu with the three dots at the bottom of your screen. And as I mentioned before, please use the chat to communicate with us. This is being recorded so that we can rebroadcast it later for you to view again or to share with your community or those individuals who could not join in tonight. We are here to celebrate this this theme, this day of transgender visibility, and we have members within our Centers for Spiritual Living community that are here as visible folks to represent today. And first, we have Jesse Keeler, who will be offering our opening spiritual mind treatment.
Thank you, Rev Darrell. So everyone, as we join in this celebration, just taking a deep breath and settle in wherever you are. And as you exhale whatever you're hanging on to, just let it go. And breathe in again, taking the goodness of this day and of this life. And as you let go, you return to the earth, what no longer serves you, where it's neutralized. And I know that right here and right now, we call in our angels and our ancestors, our guides and our guardians. And I know that there is one life, this thing we call God. And in this God, there is this multiplicity of diversity that is ever present and always active in our lives, that creates this life in all of its magnificence, in all of its glory. And there is no life that is not sacred. All life is sacred. All beings are sacred in this thing we call God. Each and every person that is present here right now is an individuation of that divine spirit of love, of joy, of peace, of freedom. And in this authentic moment that we come together, we are love. And we share in this love. And we bless Rev Christine and Rev Elijah and all who have come to present today and to share their experiences, knowing they are divine. And the hearts that are here are opened, and we all grow together. We all love together in this sharing. There is no struggle. There is no strife in this divine life, in this thing we call God. There's joy. There's freedom. There's abundance. And we are that. Each and every one. And we thank those that are as allies here today for showing up in their support as we bless each and every person that's here, knowing that there's only one life, and that's God's life, right here and right now. And I open this celebration and say, hallelujah. Thank you. Thank you for our transgender community. Thank you for our gender diversity. Thank you, God. Thank you, life. And so it is.
So it is. Thank you, God, for our diverse community indeed. Before we move on into the heart of our conversation tonight, we always like to begin by doing a land acknowledgement. If you are not familiar with doing a land acknowledgement, it is simply an opportunity to recognize, in the spirit of reconciliation and peace, that we are grateful for the opportunity to meet on sacred lands, lands that were important to tribes, to families, to communities way, way, way before any of us had feet on the ground. And we thank the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. We recognize our oneness, we realize our history, and we choose to create a new reality. We are one. Miigwech, which means thank you. If you are interested in looking up the land that you are on, there is a link in the chat, nativeland.ca, where you can see who was inhibiting this land. Obviously, it wasn't just one tribe or one group. And if you want, you can throw into the chat where you sit and where you rest. So our conversation tonight is focused on this Transgender Day of Visibility, but we have to acknowledge that we are all on a spectrum, right? That there is a spectrum of gender, there is a spectrum of our community, and we are just lifting up a certain part of that. And it's important that those of us who don't necessarily identify as transgender are here so that we can surround our siblings, our friends, our colleagues, our coworkers, our beloveds, and say, yes, thank you for being, as Jesse said, this amazing, diverse community that we are. And we just take a moment tonight to spotlight that and to learn a little bit more about those community members, and then also learn about how we can, on the spectrum, be of greater support, care, advocacy, and act as an ally. And so with that, we have an amazing inspirational video to kind of kick us off into our conversation tonight.
So, all right, Larry, the floor is yours. You got 2 minutes.
First of all, I'd like to apologize to you people. I was invited here to give my support for Bill 401. I have very little knowledge of gay people and things like that there. So when I came here, my eyes were open. I was one of the critics that sat on the side and made the decisions there was only 2 genders. So I got an education that was unbelievable. And I don't know just exactly how to say this, but my perspective for people have changed. So I don't want to take up no more of your time. I'd like to apologize for being here, and I learned a very lot about this group of people.
So we are here to learn, and my pronouns are he, him, and I invite my colleague, Reverend Christine Monks, to carry us forward.
Thank you, Reverend Darrell. I am Christine Renée Monks. My pronouns are she and her, and I am a transgender woman. I felt like it was important that we start with that video because it's just such a touching expression of this man who came into a hearing convinced he was ready to be against something that he didn't really know much about. And after spending time hearing people tell their stories, he came away with a really different perspective and viewpoint. And that's part of what I think Transgender Day of Visibility is the opportunity for those of us who choose to be visible as transgender individuals to share story and create compassion and potentially more understanding, or if nothing else, just curiosity as to what would inspire or drive someone to choose to do something as significant as changing their sex or their gender. So I don't want to get into too much right now with this. What I want to do is transition into this idea of explaining a little bit about Transgender Day of Visibility as opposed to Transgender Day of Remembrance. So Transgender Day of Remembrance is when we honor the lives and celebrate the lives of the people who lost their lives to violence, either through murder or some other form of human humiliation, or through ending their lives through suicide, which is, again, a traumatic way to lose your life. So this is a much more exciting day to get together than it is to get together to celebrate people who have transitioned from this plane. And we can celebrate the contributions that transgender people make into society. So I'm really excited that we have the opportunity to do this today. I would like to invite Elijah to come up onto the spotlight. And Elijah, welcome. You don't identify as transgender, but I see that you have they, them pronouns, so perhaps you'd like to take a second and introduce yourself before you get into some storytelling around that.
Yeah, thanks, Christine, and thank you everybody for being here. I'm Reverend Elisha Christopher, and I do use they and them pronouns. I identify as either gender fluid or non-binary, and I'll tell you a lot more about what that means to me later. But I'm really grateful to be here. As Darrell said earlier, that gender really is a spectrum. And I'm grateful to be able to represent the visibility of non-binary people in this event we're having today. So thanks, Christine.
Perfect. Thank you, Elijah. And then I'm also going to invite Reverend Dereca Blackmon to join us. Dereca uses she, they pronouns. And well, why don't you tell us about that? Tell us about, are you transgender, or how are you here today?
Yes, awesome. Thank you so much, Christine, and thank you to the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for helping us host this event today. Again, I'm Reverend Dereca Blackmon. I use she or they gender pronouns, and I chose to add the they, them pronouns to the pronouns that I identify with as an act of allyship to my friends in the trans and non-binary communities, because as an educator in DEI, around the world, me just saying I use they, them pronouns was a pretty radical act when I started doing it many years ago. And people would be like, what does that mean? So I really did it as a way to start the conversation. And I'll get a chance to talk a little bit more about my allyship journey later. But thank you for allowing us allies to have a place in this day as we celebrate the visibility of trans folks. Thank you so much.
Thanks. And I appreciate that being an invitation to people to ask more, right? Because at the highest level, this should be an invitation where we ask people, well, tell me what that means, and so on. So excellent. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad that your dedication to support for the transgender and gender fluid community inspired you to help make this a reality today for us on Transgender Day of Visibility. I think I'm going to start a little bit with sharing my story. And I want to begin by talking a little bit about when I first became aware of a disconnect between my sex assigned at birth and my gender identity. The story around my family is that at 3 years old, I told my mom, God made a mistake. I'm supposed to be a girl. And I don't really have a specific recollection of that happening, but it seems completely congruent with how I remember feeling at that point, because it was at that point where I first began to understand what we call gender roles to be. Is boys are allowed to do this and girls are allowed to do that. And oftentimes I refer to these as the gender straitjackets because there's not always a lot of invitation, to use Dereca's word, about, well, you can play with dolls or you can play with G.I. Joes. My dad was a World War II Marine, and he certainly thought he had a really sissy son, is what he thought when that whole conversation happened. And when this happened for me, there wasn't even a word of transgender, and I just didn't really understand it. So I knew very early on that this was who I thought I should be. I didn't think I was necessarily a girl, but I knew that this is who I wanted to be and who I felt like the lens I could express myself through most authentically. Fast forward, I remember going into puberty and telling my mom that I still felt the same way. And she just shrugged her shoulders and said, what are we going to do? What can you do about it? And there really wasn't anything. So I spent most of my life presenting as male and living in a heteronormative kind of environment. But as I got older, the part of me that represents Christine kept getting louder and louder. She had been locked in the attic of my consciousness for my entire life, and yet I never let her out. But she was too precious for me to ever want to kill her completely, because I thought it was one of the most beautiful parts of me, even though I couldn't find a way to express it adequately. So later in my life, I started contemplating what would it be like if I transitioned? What would that look like? I went out for the first time dressed as Christine, female. It was awkward and uncomfortable as can be. And I thought, this light wants to shine. And so I made the choice later in my life that I didn't want to die with no one knowing who I am. I wanted to find my voice. I wanted to be seen. And neither of those things were possible because I was hiding who I was from everyone. My singing voice turned out to be the voice I was seeking because I re-embraced choral singing after my transition, which required a little work to get up into the alto and soprano range where I was wanting to sing rather than where I had been used to singing, but that's turned out really well too. So for me, this whole journey has been one about authenticity and vulnerability. For me, the visibility comes from wanting to not hide who I am so that I'm not inauthentic before I transition. And then for me, it would be inauthentic to deny my life when I was presenting as male. So at this point, I think I want to invite Elisha to join me. And Elijah, how about you share a bit about your gender journey with us? If any of your gender journey was similar to mine, that would be interesting. There probably are areas where what isn't similar, but I would love to hear about you and how you came to where you are today.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. And I really appreciate just hearing a little bit more about your journey. We've gotten to know each other a little bit, but to really hear the story. And the thing that really stuck out is that they start off exactly the same. That at 3 years old, I remember very clearly walking into the kitchen and telling my mom I was supposed to be a girl and was punished. And my entire early upbringing, everything that I was drawn to were all the things that were what my sister was doing. And I wanted to play with the dolls. I wanted to put makeup on and do all the things. And I was regularly shamed for anything feminine in my entire upbringing. And I will actually say, and this is something I've not actually said publicly but to very few people, is that I actually, for much of my life, thought I identified as trans, and really considered gender reassignment surgery for many, many, many years, and spent almost 2 decades actually considering the option. And for a number of reasons, just decided that was not the decision for me. And what's unfolded over the number of years as I've just gotten to know myself is that I finally kind of found this idea of, oh, I can be gender fluid. I can be non-binary. Like, what if I just reject the gender concepts completely and just allow like the essence of who I am to be expressed? And that has been where I found my freedom of saying I completely reject what anyone projects upon me as what is expected of me as my gender based on my sex. Um, and and I will tell you that I cringe when people refer to me as he, because it actually doesn't feel true. It doesn't feel like my identity, and that's why I've chosen to request and ask and say that my pronouns are they and them, because it feels something that's much more aligned, that I can stand in the in-between, and that to be called, I mean, even to be called she would probably feel a little bit more appropriate, but he just does not, even though I've chosen to identify and live in this body. Um, and I will also say that, you know, for much of my life, um, even having facial hair at all was like the scariest, most unacceptable thing that it was part of my existence. And I will just, to be truly honest, it was actually in the previous Trump administration, where I was living, I actually didn't feel fully safe, and chose to grow out my facial hair mostly as a protection mechanism. And I will tell you that without this, I present very differently. And it has I called it a radical experiment in gender because the world responded to me completely differently with facial hair. And that was a huge growth edge for myself because I saw myself very differently as well. And so I feel like my life's journey has kind of been just an experiment in gender expression, and that my authenticity really lies in the in-between. Um, and and yeah, I think that's a good kind of explanation of my gender journey in a little nutshell. Um,
I want to honor you for the courage that you just of your share right now, because you shared some things that you said you hadn't previously shared. And doing gender reassignment surgery is a big deal. And I do sometimes think within the trans community, people think if you don't do that, you're not really serious about it. And I've talked to some of my trans sisters about this, of saying, have you thought about this? That we're kind of like, if you're really trans, you'll go all the way, right? And we need to have a space for both, and because ideally these gender straitjackets that we all are brought up in, right? Being shamed, being criticized is not helpful. And ideally we would integrate our masculine and feminine into a way that we can just be. And I honor that in you and how you choose to show up.
yeah, thank you. And it kind of brings me to tears a little bit, just um, because I think it's also to what you said that not all trans people choose to transition. And that again, where does that leave me in the spectrum of identity, and what letters do I identify with, and where do I fit into this spectrum? And I think that I'm just grateful to be able to be here and share my version of this experience, because I think that it does open us up to just be like, each person's journey is their own, and like finding our authenticity and our true self is the whole point, right? And what's my journey and what yours, each are beautiful, but they're so different.
Right. Yeah, and people sometimes, and this is not primarily to teach people today, it's as much to share our stories, but gender expression is really different than sexual orientation, right? One is who you're attracted to, and one is who you see yourself as, or how you feel comfortable expressing yourself. So I do think that people could be more curious about things like this. And I could imagine that the facial hair definitely causes you to be seen differently, because I do sometimes think that the journey of a transgender man, when there's facial hair involved, that helps be a real marker of masculinity, the same way as breasts or other things might be a mark of femininity for people who aren't sure. And then there's always the whole thing with the voice, is where's your voice in this whole continuum or spectrum of voices, and how much does that share with you? So,
Yeah.
well, I appreciate that. I think we're going to transition to Dereca at this point. Hello, Dereca.
Hello, Christine. Hello, Natasha.
Oh, well, I am so interested in hearing about your gender journey as an ally, or whatever feels authentic for you to share, because probably most of the people on this call today or on this Zoom do not identify as transgender. So the idea of the perspective of the ally, I think, is an important voice to bring into the room.
Thank you so much. I am honored to be able to share just a little bit about my journey. As a DEI educator for many years, I ran an office for diversity and inclusion at Stanford, and it is when I first really got to have a personal experience with a member of the trans community. And before that, I would say I was sort of apathetic and unaware of what the issues were that face the community. And I met a woman there, a young woman, who really pushed me to really consider issues that I had never considered before. And she gave a lot of pushback on some of the things that I was teaching around inclusion at Stanford. And, you know, I was kind of using a little bit of a kumbaya approach, and everyone should care about everyone. And she really politicized me, I think, a lot around trans identity. And I wrote an article about creating safe and brave spaces for everyone. And she wrote an article about why my brave space sucked. And a lot of what I was doing to supposedly help everyone, she didn't feel was really helping her as a trans woman in the way that she wanted. And I hired her. And I said, okay, listen, she said, I'm doing a lot of labor and I'm not being compensated for it. And I'm a student and you're the educator. And she just, you know, kind of came at me with a lot of stuff. And it was hard, but I think for me as a person who comes from a lot of marginalized backgrounds, whether it was being low income or being a woman or being Black or being queer or whatever the things were that I faced in my life, I was used to having marginalized identities. I didn't know what cisgender was. I didn't have any idea what that was or why it was important or relevant. And I could be a little dismissive. So even though I hired her and I hired another trans person in the course of my 5 years at Stanford, I think I hired 4 or 5 different trans folks. And why is because they started to say, okay, this is an office where we're going to be welcome and our voices are going to be heard. But I have to admit, and you know, there's you and other folks on this committee will know that I sometimes was that horrible ally who thinks I know more than the community itself. So I hired these wonderful people, and then I sort of was like, okay, you're a little too radical, if you can believe that. You're a little too radical for Stanford, and we're not going to be able to do those kinds of things. And I don't think that's the way we want to do it. And so we were developing a workshop on trans issues in the office, and I wanted them to tell their stories as we're doing here, at Trans Day of Visibility, people telling their stories. And they said, no, we're tired of telling our story. We don't want to tell our story anymore for the benefit of other people trotting out our trauma. Now, I need to tell you that there's a term now called trauma mining that didn't exist back then. So this was, God, at least 8 years ago. And they were like, no, we don't want to tell our stories anymore. And I was like, but that's the way you open people's heart. And this will all sound familiar to you, Christine. I was like, that's the way people learn and all of that. And they were like, no. And they were like, we have a different idea for how we're going to teach. We don't want to do a workshop on trans identity. We want to do a workshop on gender, period, for everyone. And I was like, I know this is so horrible, but I feel like sometimes when we tell the horrible things that we've done, it helps other people realize we all make mistakes. I said, well, that's not what the last trans person who worked here said we should do. And so here are these 2 trans staff that I have. And, it was awful. And they stood their ground and stood their ground with me. And then eventually they came up with this workshop. And I want to show the slide that we had. I've been private chatting with Sharon, so I think she's ready to go. This is the allyship continuum that is adapted from Jennifer Brown's work on race. And my company, Inclusion Design, adapted it to move from apathy to advocate. Sometimes you hear people talk about accomplice. And really kind of on any issue that comes up around diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice and belonging, take a look at where you are, right? Because most of us start here with apathy, silence, which just so you know, when you are silent about these things, it endorses the status quo, makes little or no effort to understand the issues, and excuses for lack of action. Well, what are our excuses? Well, I don't know anybody like that. Well, kind of not so true, really, when we think about a spectrum of gender and nonconformity, when we think about fluidity, we've all challenged, many of us have challenged gender norms at some point in our life. And then I moved over to Ally and I started to realize I don't know anything and I need to get educated about this. Here I am calling myself a DEI educator and I know nothing about this. I'm running this office and I don't know what they're talking about. And then I started to speak out and interrupt prejudice and discrimination. I thought I was amazing. I was an ally. But what I realized when they wanted to make this change to the workshop was that I hadn't actually committed over here an advocate to action that creates systemic change. And I wanted to begin the process of educating others. And we did an event yesterday for service. We gave out flags, but I also gave the podium to someone who was trans so that they could share what they wanted to share as part of Trans Day of Visibility. And I'm learning a lot about that from you, Christine. So thank you for that. So let's see, how am I on time? So what I want to say is the workshop that they created. Let me give their advocate moment as well. The workshop that they created, they said, we don't want to talk about just our stories as trans people. We want to help people understand the way gender is constructed for all of us. And so we did this activity that we've decided to bring to you all tonight. And what we're going to do is ask the question that they asked in that workshop they designed so many years ago, which is really to take a look at when you first developed your ideas about gender. When did you first become aware of gender? So in a moment here, we're going to go into breaking out into our breakout rooms, and we're going to break out into groups of 3. And what we're going to ask you to do is to give your name, your community, and your pronouns if you choose. Because there are still people who are trans or non-binary who feel that asking for pronouns actually outs them. Some trans folks don't necessarily want to be talking about their pronouns every day. So there's not a right or wrong as it relates to that. But for me as an advocate, I always ask and I always offer them. So we're going to invite you to get into groups of 3, and you're going to give your name, community, and pronouns. And then you're going to talk about when you first became aware of your own gender. When's the first time somebody said to you something about gender, or you first noticed something about gender? When did you first become aware of what the rules were, what learning was expected for boys and girls, as how most of us were raised, right? And so we're talking about your own personal experiences. Your name, community, and pronouns is 1. When you first became aware of your gender, and how you felt learning about what was expected of boys and girls, if those were the norms you grew up around, right? The way we want to do this in the breakout is we're going to have 18 minutes in the rooms. You'll have a 1-minute warning at 17 minutes. So each person will have about 6 minutes. But instead of having one person go for 6 minutes, we're going to ask you to do the questions in a round, because one of the things we want most is for everyone to get a chance to talk, because some of us think this is a topic for other people. But if we all investigate the ways in which gender shows up in our own lives and experience, we get a little bit closer to understanding the spectrum and how gender is shaped by our society. Did I miss anything, Christine?
No, you did great, Dereca. I think that's going to be so exciting. And I'm inviting everyone to go into a breakout room. If we find that people are not going into the breakout room, then we will bring some other people in, because we don't want you to be in a breakout room all by yourself. And I see Daryl unmuted himself. So is that
I was just
consistent
going
with
to
what
say,
you're saying?
yeah, if we're not going to force people into rooms, so if someone does not want to go, then just don't select moving into the room. You won't be automatically moved there. So you will have to click on a button that says go to the room now, since we're not automatically putting people there. And our rooms are set up so we've had a couple
Perfect.
people kind of move in and out, so we may have a room where there's only 2 people as opposed to 3. Just go ahead and get started once you're
And you
in.
get more time.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go ahead and open up the breakout rooms now.
Thank you, everyone, for, I hope you had a good experience and some dialogue and sharing. So we're going to move into 2 components here. The first is we'd invite someone from your group to just do a quick share out of what was discussed in your group, some maybe thoughts, the answers to the questions around when people became aware of gender, and learning about the differences and the expected actions of being a boy or a girl. And along with that, we would love it if there's any questions that you have in particular that you would like to, since this is Transgender Day of Visibility, we are going to move into a Q&A time with Christine, Elisha, Jesse, and Rafe. So if there are any questions that you would like to ask of our transgender siblings here, please put it into the chat and we will highlight those when we move into the Q&A time. But for anyone who would like to share from their group, if you could raise your hand, that will pop you up to the top of the screen and then we can call on you. And we're asking to be as concise as you can possibly be, maybe just a minute or so that we can get as many voices shared out as possible. All right, Joan. I see your hand went off the screen, so I'm assuming you put your hand up. I need you to unmute yourself.
Okay,
There.
I think I did. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So our group of 3 women found that the constraints of the female gender were particularly striking to us in the various ways that we understood what our role would be. And much of it was to be childbearing. We were all women, I think, over, let's say, late 60s or 70. And we noted that many younger women we know, like in their 40s and down, don't feel that inevitable pressure to have children. And we, on the other hand, who all did have children, found that it was really in our 50s that we sort of came alive. Many of us got divorced, and most of us did, and, you know, sort of found ourselves in various ways.
Thank you. Anyone else care to share? The easiest way for it to pop up is if you click on the reaction button and click raise hand.
I
It
don't
will
have a
really-
reaction button. Hello, I am practitioner Rosanna from East Bay Church of Religious Science, Reverend Dereca and Reverend Arlene King. I think we were collectively just feeling like we just were who we were as women and just having fun, just doing what we were doing and not giving it any titles. But and if I'm speaking or missing something, I was with Ruth Littlejohn and Deborah. I didn't get Deborah's last name. And I'm complete.
Thank you so much, Rosanna. So next up, I see Sherry.
Hello, all. So our group of three are all cis women, meaning we are the gender that we were assigned at birth and identify with that. And we didn't have real strong memories of real young, but we found that the institutions, when we started going to school, that church was where male and female roles were reinforced by what we had to wear. Bathrooms, okay, boys line up over here, girls line up over there. And for another person in our group, they said, well, how come I can't play baseball? How come only boys get to do that? So it was kind of more external factors that we talked about anyway. And at around the first grade-ish age, even though we were aware of male and female parts, but having that emotional, I don't want to say reaction, but emotional awareness. And I'm complete.
Thank you, Sherry. Ruth, I see your hand up next. If you want to unmute yourself.
Sure. I was in the group with Rosanna and Deborah. And what I shared is I was raised on a farm until I was 6. And then when I came to the city of Norfolk, I like to play marbles. I'm always the risk taker. So I would be playing marbles and they'd be plucking you on your nails and all those kinds of. My mother always said that girls don't play marbles and they definitely don't win. So if I won, she would throw my marbles out of the window. So people loved to play with me because they knew they'd get the marbles back. So it was that kind of thing and so I've always been that kind of a, what we call tomboy. That's who I was. And even as I was sharing in the group, as I got older in school, because I'm 5'10" and serious looking, and I beat up a couple of boys. That didn't help either. I'm just saying. And so it was. Then guys would say, when they wanted to have sex with you, they said, "Well, I think you're a lesbian." So I mean, it was all that kind of a stuff in there. So I have lived as a female. Because I'd be honest with you, I didn't think I could deal with another marginalized group, to be honest with you. I mean, if I really look at my life, particularly in the Black community, could I stomach another marginalized group? And the answer is no. So I don't know if that's a choice or a force, but that's how I've lived my life. I'm complete.
Thank you, Ruth. Joel.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. I was with Karina and Tiffany. I think for the three of us, well, I'll just say for myself, it seems similar that somewhere around 4 or 5 years old, kind of coming aware of that gender thing, but we're each different, in terms of being from a single household, a single child household. And like myself, I grew up with 5 brothers and didn't have a sister till I was 9. But I look back then and I think kind of like playing doctor with a little neighbor girl around 4 or 5 years old, kind of realizing we're both different down there. We're kind of both curious. But then from there on out, it was kind of like the typical, for me anyway, of the gender stuff of being socialized to be to just be a cis male and that's it, you know. So and then my feelings about it, I don't think I had feelings about it back then. It was just kind of like what happened, but I didn't get those feelings until I became older as an adult, you know, realizing that how I was so trained, so much so that I don't think about it. And then I shared with my group that I'm a baby boomer. So, you know, born in 52, and I remember being in my late 20s and being married, and I didn't want my friends to know that I helped with the housework, you know, that I did dishes and stuff. And then from an all-boy family, and my mama didn't take no mess. I could clean clothes, I could wash dishes and iron clothes better than most people, you know. So even today, if my wife brings me her dress and would you iron this for me? And I go, yes. And I don't care who knows about it now. So thank you.
Thank you, Joel. All right, I think we have time for one more quick one from Erica.
And I forgot to say hi to my Reverend Dereca. Hi, Reverend Dereca. So good to see you.
Joel.
Hi,
Hello.
I am in the Denver, Colorado area. A couple of my group mates were, I think, from California and one from New Orleans, so a diverse area. And I am a trans woman, very active out in that way, and put a little bit of info in the chat about I have a book that just came out this year that has a bit of my story in it, but it's more about spirituality, and it's been a spiritual journey for me and my gender identity. So just encourage everyone to explore more as this group is encouraging.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Erica.
So we have an opportunity now, which I think will maybe, you know, require some courage on our parts. This is an opportunity to have conversation, to ask questions of Christine, of Elisha, and of Rafe, about their gender journey and maybe about what life is like now, or maybe if you have questions about allyship, like what it means to how, you know, you can behave and act and embody being an ally. There's no kind of question that's out of zone here. So if you want to type that into the chat, we can bring those questions forward. And while I'm waiting for a handful of them to come in, I'll just share really quick. I had a flashback to being a preschool teacher in terms of constructs. And as many of you know, there aren't many men in early childhood education. And I was working at a preschool with 3 to 5-year-olds, and all of the adults in the building were called Miss in their first name. But I was not known as a miss by society. But these 3 to 5-year-old kids didn't have that construct. They just knew they had to be polite and appropriate. And the way you did that is you referred to the adults or to the big people as Miss in their first name. So I was Miss Darrell for a whole school year. And as many times as the female teachers would get upset and correct those young 3-year-olds, Daryl's not a girl, call him Mr. Daryl. They would go, okay. And, you know, 5 seconds later, they'd be like, Miss Daryl, will you tie my shoe? And it was, I was in my early 20s. It was a really powerful moment of having that, the construct really brought forward. Okay, so we've got some questions. I don't know if you want to pick it up, Christine, and pass on the questions. But the first one that came in was, what are some ways to support young people on their gender journey?
Does anyone feel inspired to answer that one?
I guess I will just say that I think one of the biggest things is just being willing to listen and ask questions and not project. and to respect wherever someone is, however old they are, but even if they're young, like to respect where people are on their journey, and to give, I think, just to be open in your own mind to allowing them to blossom on their own and be the affirming presence in their life. I think that's one of the things that trans and queer and non-binary kids, especially young people right now, is just need people who affirm their existence and not shame or make them wrong for questioning or exploring who they are.
I love that answer. Just let them explore.
Thank you. If no one else wants to entertain that, we've got a couple of more questions. The next one is, have you been concerned for your safety as a trans or gender fluid person?
I would love to address that one.
I was hoping you would, Rafe. We haven't
Thanks,
gotten to
Rafe.
hear from you yet.
Yes, because I have been threatened numerous times. As the senior minister of a CSL community, I was threatened by a community member to be shot in the face with a Glock 17. Even though on my candidate process, I was very open and very honest about being a transgender person. And this particular individual actually campaigned to have me as their minister until something happened that they disagreed with. And that was the resort for them. I have been threatened out in the community in men's bathrooms. It's a complex journey. And I want to take the opportunity to say this because it often is not said and it needs to be said. I did a gender alignment. Deborah, my wife, did all the transitioning. We were together as a lesbian couple, and everything that I go through, she goes through from a different lens. When my life was threatened, her husband's life was threatened. And when we're talking about transgender visibility, I never hear us acknowledge the partners of trans people. And I think it's a huge misstep and a missed opportunity on our part. And so publicly in this moment, Deborah Ellis, thank you for being a warrior. Thank you.
That's a good thing that you acknowledge that, Rafe, because your wife is a warrior in her own right. And obviously she signed on for the journey with you, which is great. So what else do we have here? Someone asked about.
It's along the same lines, I think, but maybe, I don't know if you want to entertain something, Christine. What is it like to be out as a non-cisgender person in the public eye, and how can we support you?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. It's everything and more. In some ways, my light is shining brighter than it ever did before I was presenting this way. And some days I think, oh my goodness, what have you shared with them about this, and how vulnerable have you made yourself with people you don't know what they think of you? So in the current environment, it's kind of scary. There's a lot of these executive orders that have come down that, legally require me to use the men's restroom and require Rafe to use the women's restroom. And as though that was really going to fix the problem, because I assure you, if I walk into the men's room, someone will say, lady, what are you doing here? And if Rafe walks into the women's restroom, somebody's going to say, excuse me, sir, get out of here. And yet this whole idea is that our sex was immutable and assigned at birth puts people in a weird position. So for me, it's authentic to share my story and hope that more people understand it. But right now it does seem like we're in scary times. And I believe that something greater wants to be born out of this time. This is a clarity. This is a sickness that we've all had within our society. And I think we need to talk about it openly. So thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so there's a couple of questions that I'm kind of jumping ahead just in terms of resources. Someone's asked about resources to support families, or where can teens go if they've been kicked out or banned from their homes? Obviously, that's, I think, somewhat specific to a very to the community that you're in. I just typed in a handful of organizations that might at least open up doors for you to find resources that are local. These are larger organizations. Yeah, so what are some resources I can go to for learning how to support a family who now has a young trans woman in the family? PFLAG in particular, right? Is that for supporting?
Parents and friends of lesbian and gay, but they have a big group with the trans community too. And part of it, I'll just say this: don't ostracize them because you feel uncomfortable with this, right? I mean, how often do we just say it's just too much work to learn this kid's new pronouns or whatever, and just understand that when a child expresses their intent to be different or expresses that who they are is not who you thought they were, if you're a parent, it's like that's a courageous act. And for them, there's part of this vision for this child that they are having to let go of. So anything you can do to be supportive of the family, whether you're a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle or a cousin, just acknowledging that and acknowledging that they're still part of your community and you still love them or part of your family, I think is so important. Anything you want to add, Elisha, to that? I see you nodding your head.
Yeah, I was just in agreement. I was thinking, as far as resources, I think it's always just really an easy one is look up who in your community is the support is puts on your local pride event, and that organization will have resources that are local to where you are.
Great suggestion.
And just know that right now it's really challenging because even some of the resources, because of the current climate in our society, are going underground to protect themselves from being erased from existence. And so you might have to dig a little harder than you did 3 months ago.
And this might be a really good way to segue into what our next portion was some slides that Elisha had on.
So, Christine, if I could, there's a couple of really important questions in there about CSL and spiritual principle that I would really, I know we have a schedule, and I'm asking if we can like bend it a little bit and answer these.
Well, jump in if you want to. You're talking about Tracy's question?
Well, and the one before that is ministers. How do you address conflict around gender expression in a CSL community and the spiritual principles? And those two, for me, they kind of go together. And here's the thing: if we claim to be inclusive communities, then we have to be inclusive of everybody, which means I have to, as spiritual principle, include people who hate me simply because I exist. Now, I don't have to tolerate certain behaviors, but to be in integrity, I do have to include them. And so I deal with the conflict the same way I deal with the conflict if they didn't like the music. Right? There's no special dispensation around transgender conflict. It's conflict. And so we have a conversation. And hopefully everybody's honest and authentic in sharing in those conversations. And at the very least, hopefully we can reach agreements. The spiritual principles for me are always the same. We claim oneness, and I'm just going to call the elephant in the room, but not a lot of us are willing to live oneness. We sidestep it, and every time I hear a metaphysician say that doesn't apply to me, that's duality. So if we really are living a principle of oneness, then damn it, live it. Quit talking about it and put some feet to it. And dare, I said this on Sunday with my own community. We're a new thought spirituality. I dare you to freaking have one.
Thank you for that, Rafe. Yes, I think we could probably have a whole webinar on just that topic.
Yeah, if I could
We're
just
all,
jump in,
we're
like,
all one
so
except for
briefly.
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, oh golly, there are two. One of the, as far as principles, like one, we say in our Centers for Spiritual Living mission, vision, purpose, who we are to awaken humanity to its spiritual magnificence. This is spiritual magnificence, right? It's that like the unleashing of the truth of who we are, and I find like that is core for me. And then just really quickly, another principle that came out in a talk a couple weeks ago is we have this idea, we talk about a new thought about what resists persists. And I realized recently that there's a really beautiful spiritual principle when I are that which is being resisted. When when our identities are being resisted, guess what? We persist, right? And that pressure gives us power. And I realized that we often think of what resist persists as, oh, don't push against. But what if you are the thing that's being resisted? Suddenly there's power there. There's a principle there for us to embrace and embody to be more under the pressure. And that to me it's kind of one of my calls right now, is that if I'm being resisted, that means it's time for me to persist.
Perfect. Thank you. Let's move that as the transition to your slides that you want to share.
Great.
Shall we do that?
Yeah, so we're gonna pull those. Someone's gonna pull those up for me.
They
right?
are. It's going to
Excellent.
magically
I love how it
happen
just
because
magically
it
happens.
does. No, this is all magic.
So one of the things I just wanted to talk about just really briefly is how to use some more gender inclusive or non-exclusive language. And this actually just came out of a very silly moment I had at a conference, one of our conferences a couple of years ago, where myself and another non-binary individual were standing talking, and one of the musicians came out of the main hall and said, "Hey guys, wait, what am I supposed to say?" And it was like, not hey guys, right? And so how do we reframe that language? And so, refer to people as friends or folks or everyone or you all, right? Y'all is my favorite gender inclusive term for everybody, right? Folks, y'all. So just to remember that when we're speaking to groups of people, when we're holding space, when we're referring to each other, not to automatically go into those terms we've all used, ladies and gentlemen, ma'am, sir, guys and girls, like, what does it look like to create language that's more open and inclusive? And so some of these really simple examples, right? We're say, hi, everyone. And for you, can I get y'all something? Good morning, folks. Thanks, friends. Have a great night. Like, it's really easy. But just to be mindful that we're not genderizing our language at everyone and creating that binary just in how we speak. And so the Y on that bottom there is just shifting to gender inclusive language, respects and acknowledges the gender identities of all people and removes assumptions. And so just to be mindful of language. And as someone who uses they and them pronouns, it's remarkable to me how complicated people seem to think it is to use they and them in a sentence. Or one of the things that I get is that's not proper English. And I hate to break it to you. Actually, I do love to break it to you. It actually is proper English to use they and them as a singular gender neutral pronoun. And it goes all the way back to like the 14th century. And, Chaucer and Shakespeare and others have used that in language. And, if we think about, we often use they as a singular if we don't know who we're talking about. And we can use that same principle if you don't know the person's gender or they don't know their own gender, like someone like me who says they, them sits me in between. And so to use that ambiguous singular they allows for a word that we already have. We don't have to make up new words. We already have words that can allow this. And so Some things that we can use as gender inclusive terms, of course, using they, them pronouns, but also not always using husband or wife, for example, right? Use words like spouse or partner, significant other, rather than wife or husband. Siblings rather than sisters or brothers. My favorite, folks or everyone, instead of saying ladies and gentlemen. We can also just refer to each other as humans rather than men or women. And again, spouse for, wife or husband, and kids instead of boys and girls, right? We have lots of words that are gender inclusive that don't automatically set up the binary. And I just want to always add, as someone who's advocating for the use of pronouns, really simple things you can do to show your allyship or advocacy is like adding your pronouns to your email signature, even if you're a cisgendered person, like that shows inclusion, right? Adding your pronouns to your Zoom name, including your pronouns on, if you have services, you have name tags, create a place for pronouns on those name tags. Just doing that lets queer and non-binary folks, when they walk into your space, know, oh, I'm safe here, right? Include your pronouns as part of your introductions when speaking or facilitating, as we did at the beginning of this. And if you're unsure of someone's pronouns, just ask them. It's really okay to ask. And on the other side of that, don't assume someone's pronouns based on how they look. And then the most important one for me is refer to people by their stated pronouns. I cannot tell you how often I introduce myself as they and them, and people continuously refer to me as he. And it's simply asking you to see me as I identify myself and reflect that back to me. And so that's just some very simple starting points. If you just want to know, where do I start? Just play with language and be comfortable asking if necessary.
Thank you, Elisha. I think we're going to take it back to Daryl to kind of close us out before we have our closing spiritual mind treatment from Rafe.
So I want to thank, did I unmute myself? Yes. Thank everyone for attending. There is a survey that we're going to be posting into the chat, and we would love to get your feedback. It helps us continue to move these webinars and hear your feedback, what worked, what didn't work, what you would even like to hear more about. It's always so mind-boggling how quickly 90 minutes flies by. Before we end, Reverend Dereca.
Yes, just really quickly, I wanted to acknowledge Deborah posted in the chat partners as a resource, and just wanted to acknowledge her for speaking up around that, tapping into that untapped resource of partners. And also thank you all for putting the links. There are some really comprehensive things around allies that I had hoped to have just 1 second to just show people what is out there and available. Because sometimes we put these links in and you don't realize all of what is there. Do we still have time for that?
We don't. We're 2 minutes over already right now, Dereca, so sorry.
Oh, I see. So I do want to encourage you, because we can drop a link, but if you don't look, you don't realize how comprehensive what is out there. And I know that was a lot of people's questions, was what could they do? So we'll have another event. Thank you.
Okay. We're going to Rafe. You have the floor, sir.
And so what I know in every fiber of my being is that there is one substance, one omnipotence, one omnipresence, one omniscience that is the source of all. One creation, whole, perfect, and complete, that individualizes itself, intentional, one of a kind, never to be repeated, desires to know and be and expand its experience of itself as each individualized expression. Diversity itself is creation. And I know that I am that, and I know that what is true of me is true of all, seen and unseen, formed and unformed. And so I simply claim and affirm that that awareness is awakening in the hearts and minds of every individualized human expression of creation. And as it does, behavior follows and healing happens. And a world that just plain works is the end result. I claim it as so, that it is already done. And knowing that it is complete, I let go. I let go of every shred of doubt. I let go of any thought that would impede the fulfillment of the word spoken. I let it go. Ashe. Shalom. Aho. Amen. Amen.
Amen.
And so it is.
And so it is.
So it is.
Yes, yes.